Okay, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Mike, is this mic on, Mike? Can you guys hear me? No? Yes? If I just move my mouth and nothing comes out, that's what I was tempted to do. That's what they used to do with the nuns. Can you? Yeah, bring it up a little bit so they can hear me, because I'm too old to speak loudly. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for the invitation. And I hope that my plan tonight is to speak for about 3 hours. So basically, what I would like to do is give you a very short synopsis of how I became an astronomer. So I'm going to start when I was like 1 year old and go up. And then once I get through that part and get up to my research career, then I'm going to show you some of the reasons that I believe in not just Jesus, but that God upholds the universe, and all this is very easy to reconcile. It's a false dichotomy that the world believes that you can't be a scientist and a Christian at the same time. It's a cultural, it's a non-existent issue. And so I hope to show you that that is indeed the case by the time we're done. So let's get started. If you have questions, I'll be happy to answer them at the end if you're still here at 10 o'clock. So my astronomy career started when I was very young. That's me at 8 years old. And my brother had this golden book of astronomy. It's kind of what we in those days called a coffee table book. I like speaking to old people because I am one. So most of you can associate and identify with what's going on here. I used to love to look through this book, even when I was like 6 or 7 years old, because it had lots of good pictures in it. And so I thought to myself, well, if you like this so much, why don't you decide to do this for a living? And I decided this at 8 years old. So I was a nerd. So I started collecting books. I started reading them. When you're young and you read, you remember a great deal. All of you who have children, you know your kids never forget anything that you say, unless it's constructive. My parents bought me for Christmas one Christmas a $10 A.C. Gilbert. You might remember A.C. Gilbert, those who were science nerds. They also made erector sets. You guys all know what those are. And so let me show you this wonderful. Notice that the 3 telescopes that were available, my parents bought me the cheapest one. Because that's all they could afford. And so I can still remember opening this at Christmas and being all excited about it. Lots of fun. I then saved some money, and several years later bought a 2.4-inch refractor. And then I bought a mount from Edmund Scientific, which is a company, again, many of you may remember Edmund Scientific in New Jersey. They actually still exist. And I bought that mount, and then I jury-rigged it up with a couple of very fancy 2x4 blocks and some clips. And this mount allowed me to actually do astrophotography of the moon. And so that was kind of cool for a junior high and a high school student. So I was an amateur astronomer. I was lucky enough to go at Brockton High School in Massachusetts, was the largest high school in New England at the time. We had 5,100 students in this school. And the cool part was, look, we had 4 cafeterias, we had 5 libraries, we had an Olympic-sized swimming pool, we had a 1,600-seat auditorium, and who cares about that? We had a planetarium. And so I spent all of my spare time working in this planetarium. Now I'm going to do a bunch of name dropping of people you've never heard of before, but these people were all tremendously instrumental in my life. And so some of them are still alive, most of them are not. But Ron Sugo was my teacher there in high school, and I learned a great deal from him. I read about, he actually provided me a brochure about going to an institute at Spitz. Now Spitz is in Chaddsford, Pennsylvania, about 45 minutes from here, not far from Longwood Gardens. And so I read about this for teaching people how to use planetariums. And so I thought, gee, that would be really cool. And so I applied for it, and I got a letter from the head, Mike Bennett, that no, you're not accepted, we don't want you to come. Because you're a high school student and it's not going to do you any good. So then I wrote him another letter and told him, you know, I'm helping to run, that's my stockbroker. Tell him to sell. So he turned me down, and I wrote him another letter saying, look, I hope to run the planetarium in my high school, and I hope to be a planetarium director someday. So please let me in. He calls me. I still remember I was in the shower from having worked all day on the farm. And I actually spoke to him on the phone for 25 minutes, dripping wet in the towel. Because my dad yelled into me and said, there's this guy, Bennett, from Spitz, who wants to talk to you. Should I tell him to call back? So I just jumped out of the shower. You had to be there. Actually, it was good that you weren't there. So anyway, he actually let me in then. And I spent 2 weeks in this institute. And that was a life-changing moment for me. Those 2 weeks I learned so much stuff that I still use 55 years later. And I know you don't really believe that I did that, but there I am. And I actually still remember several of the people here, most of whom have gone on. And there I am, tucked away in here. So I actually still remember that lecture. This guy was actually giving a lecture on celestial navigation. He actually was teaching at a maritime academy. I know you don't care about that, but that's really cool. No, you're not going to work anymore? Okay, we're done. People from Eastern will remember Helen Kramer. Helen Kramer was instrumental in the education department at Eastern. And when the new building, McInnes, was being built, she demanded that they put a planetarium in the building, because you remember the late 60s, yes? That was just a couple of years ago. The moon program, the space program, this is a very big deal. Almost all new schools were putting planetariums in at that time. And so there was federal money available to do that. So, a lot of schools, over 1,000, put in planetariums from 1968 until about 73 during the moon program. And so Eastern did that, thanks to Helen Kramer. Of course, nobody knew how to run the thing. So Harold Howard, who was the dean at the time, my sister-in-law told him, my brother-in-law, that's me, is looking for a college, and he's helping to run a planetarium in his high school. Maybe you should contact him and see if he'd come to Eastern, because he's looking for a college. So he contacted me and said, you want to interview me. This was right after the Institute. So I met with him, showed him what I've been doing in high school, and he said, you can come to Eastern and we'll pay your tuition for 4 years if you run the planetarium. So my $75 going to the Institute sort of paid off. And that's the last time I ever made any money doing astronomy. The other agreement was that not only could I take courses at Eastern, but they also said you can take any courses you want at this little-known school called Villanova. And so they had no idea how many courses I was actually going to take. And I actually turned that into a major and had a lot of very good experiences at Villanova. This is McInnes when it was being built in 1971. You'll notice all the lousy cars here. And this is the brochure that Eastern put out, Eastern Baptist College at the time, telling people how exciting it is for them to have a planetarium, which it was. And so I actually came to Eastern as a high school senior to put on a presentation when McInnes was being opened, their opening day. So that was sort of unheard of, to have a high school senior running this planetarium. That was lots of fun. And then I gave lots and lots of classes as a student to many, many both college classes and school groups, which we still do. So we've been doing that for the past 54 years. Many, many thousands of community school groups have come to Eastern, to the planetarium. They'd much rather come to Eastern than go to, say, the Franklin Institute, because I can tailor shows to them, and they don't have to get mugged. We've done shows, like many of you may have actually seen the Star of Bethlehem show. We've been giving this show since 1972 in one form or another on what the Star of Bethlehem might have been. We still offer that if you want to come see it in December. It's only $10 a piece. That's a bargain, but you have to make reservations. This is just to show you that I used to be young. Okay. I still have all my hair, though. That's a good thing. This is the most important part of college. So this is how my gorgeous movie star wife, that's her graduation picture. and then she fell for me. So we like sort of got married. Look how beautiful she is. She hasn't changed a bit. However, I don't look like that anymore. So this is interesting. In 1975, Harold Howard, the dean, calls me into his office and he says, "What are you going to do when you graduate?" I said, "I'm going to be a planetarium director in a high school." He says, "No, that's not going to work. You're going to be wasting your talent. You need to go to grad school and become an astronomer." He says, "And if you do it nearby, if you do it in the area, you can teach astronomy at Eastern part-time." So he wants me to go to grad school and do this. And I said to him, "I'm not going to do that. That's crazy. I'm sick of school. I don't really like school, so I'm just going to be a planetarium director in a high school. That's what I've been aiming at for the past 4 years. That's what I want to do." Well, the very next day, my favorite professor, Ed Guinan at Villanova, who I really had a very close relationship with, he called me into his office. He says, "What are you going to do when you graduate?" And he didn't even wait for an answer. He says, "You're going to grad school." He says, you're just as smart as any of my students. You need to go to grad school and get your doctorate." These two guys had no connection whatsoever. They did not know each other, and they were two of the most highly respected people in my life. So I can take a hint, God, okay? I get it. Right? No connection, but they both said exactly the same thing within 24 hours of each other. And so I took that. Then I completely changed course, made astronomy my major, and decided to go to graduate school. Thanks a lot, Ed. I went that summer. I went to Harvard summer school, because I'm from Massachusetts originally, where cars are actually cars, and that was the most grueling 7 weeks of my life. Their physics majors course, a whole year of physics in 7 weeks. Including lab. You don't want to do that. I didn't want to do it. Eventually, I graduated and eventually got into Penn, University of Pennsylvania, and got my master's degree and PhD in astronomy and astrophysics. I hated grad school. But that's another story. Sometimes you have to do that stuff. Here's a picture of Kitt Peak. This is the National Observatory just outside of Tucson, where I did some of my dissertation work. It's kind of like Disneyland for astronomers. And this is Cerro Tololo in Chile, in the Andes Mountains, where I also did dissertation work. So I had lots and lots of fun once I got out of coursework in grad school. Grad school's a pain. Anybody who's been to grad school knows exactly what I'm talking about. Here's the telescope that I used in Chile. It's a 1 meter reflecting telescope. And that's just proof that I actually went there. I was on my way out, and one of the astronomers said, "Got to take your picture." So there I am. I still have that sweater. My mom made that sweater for me. So I still have that. Lots of fun. At Penn, I had two very prominent astronomers as mentors, Bob Cook on the left, and Meindert Binnendijk, a Dutchman who actually escaped from the Nazis in World War II. And both of these men had very profound effects on me, especially Dr. Binnendijk. The Binnendijk name is extremely well known in my field. So it's kind of an honor for me to have had him as a mentor. Much of what he taught me, I still do as a profession. It's what I'm known for. So thanks to them. Here's my young family. So there's my beautiful wife and my son Jonathan. He looks like about a month old. And there's Andrew, he's 3. And he'd have the Kitt Peak shirt on, of course. And so I had been working at Eastern part-time all through grad school because I'm a glutton for punishment. And then I became full-time at Eastern in '83 after having taught 9 years at part-time. I think that's right. And look at the courses I was teaching. I taught physics with lab, pre-calculus, 2 sections of programming with basic, astronomy with lab, ran the planetarium. I taught a physics class at the same time with Cabrini with lab. And then I also did research and writing papers and raising a goofy family. Yeah, that was bad. Those are very challenging years. My wife put up with me. Now, the telescope setup that we had was an 8-inch celestron that we used to have to bring up to the roof and mount. And it took an hour to get this thing set up. And that was what the kids would do lab in astronomy. And we'd actually take pictures and set up a dark room. You guys remember dark rooms? Remember film? Yeah. That was awful. And then eventually we had two. This is what the telescope looked like. And we had two of those eventually permanently mounted. You can see how fancy this observatory is. Almost as colorful as the shirt. And so we observed on that platform for 20 years, bringing telescopes up, setting them up, taking them down. That was awful. So I decided it was time to build an observatory, an actual real observatory, because I hadn't been able to do any research at Eastern because I didn't have the equipment. And so we decided to raise the funds. And so what we did in those days is we used to have something called a track. You know that you run around? Yeah. So we had jogathons where you could actually get people to pledge money, run around the track, and then they would pay you money. I know it doesn't make any sense, but it actually worked. Because you're not actually accomplishing anything, right? Sounds like government. Anyway, we raised $40,000 in the early 90s. That's a lot of money in 1990 or so, yes? And that would have been enough money to do what I wanted to do, which was build a telescope in a small observatory like this. That's the jogathon. See, there I am running, yes? So I used to run a lot. And there's my boys, look, they used to be little, now they're, 1994, so Andrew would have been, what, 12? And Jonathan would have been 9. This is what I was going to build. This is what I was aiming for. A separate building, small building with a 14-inch celestron telescope, and we could have done research with that. However, with that $40,000, the college came back and said, well, we really didn't expect you to raise any money. So there's no place on campus you can put this building, that we're not going to build something else. That's what they said. So they said, well, you can have the roof of McGinnis. Okay, thanks very much. Well, all of a sudden the observatory went from $40,000 to $300,000. So it's time to fundraise some more. And so that's what we did. We raised some more money. And eventually we got permission from Radnor to do that because it's too high. It's over the height limit, so we had to get a permit to do that. And this is what it was supposed to look like. I know it looks a lot like McGinnis, but there it is right there. You had to be there. So it took 9 years to raise the extra funds, but the cool part was that in those 9 years, in the last year, we raised an extra $150,000, so we had $450,000. So not only did we build the crazy thing, but it was extremely well equipped. And the telescopes we were going to buy, we bought bigger ones from a different company that were far superior to those. So by building it later, we had a much better facility with much better equipment. So, God knows what he's doing. I would have been happier if he'd given me the outline 10 years before that, but that's not usually the way he works. And so this is the very first day of construction, putting it together. I remember sitting in the observatory the very first day in September, sitting in the warm room by myself, praising God and saying, I don't even believe this is real. Here we are putting up the dome, one of the domes. This is after they sprayed the fireproofing on. Again, see my sons, they're getting bigger. And that's what it looks like today on top of McGinnis. And here you can see this is like a cutaway view showing the two telescopes. Very cool. So we have very good equipment. That camera setup right there is $25,000. All money that we raised in the past couple of years even. So very modern equipment. And this is just a picture out of the warm room. So instead of having to sit outside and freeze, the students can do everything remotely and even watch TV while things are going on. Yeah. Why not? We have the cows because originally there were Gateway computers, which had the Holstein boxes. I don't know if you remember that. And my father-in-law was a dairy farmer as well as a pastor. Well, we like cows. And also, I have a lot of young kids come to the observatory, school groups from 4 years old up. So it's nice to have something that's fun so they're not freaked out by all the technology. That's the excuse I use. I just like stuffed animals. Look, Ed Guinan. So Ed Guinan was not only my favorite teacher, but he and I became colleagues, and we wrote quite a few papers together. He's actually still teaching at Villanova because he keeps saying he's going to retire, and of course, he's like I am. So he's in his 56th year here. And what we study together, our main study is binary stars, which are two stars gravitationally bound, and they orbit each other. And why? Who cares? Well, 60% of all stars are binary stars. So when you were told the sun is an average star, you were lied to. Because the sun's by itself, that puts it in the minority. Most stars actually have a companion. And some of them are so close together they're actually touching, which is our specialty. I'll show you a picture of one. And so by studying these stars, it's the only way you can actually determine all their characteristics, which is very important in order to understand stars and how they're born, how they die. And I wrote several papers together, one of which, this is one of the ones we're really known for, predicting that these stars that start far apart will eventually come together and hit each other and then coalesce and form one star. And we wrote that paper, people thought we were crazy. And now it's the accepted paradigm. They would have accepted it earlier if we had come from Harvard, but because we came from Villanova and Eastern, right? You don't, right? Because remember, science is really objective. Like, we lived through COVID? Yeah, don't get me started. Anyway, stars they start detached, but eventually they coalesce, form one star. It's even possible our sun was a coalesced binary a couple weeks ago. And so they've written articles about this in popular journals, so it's an idea that has finally been accepted by the mainstream. So that's a nice thing. Not that it makes us any money. You don't want to work anymore? Thank you. You see, Jesus likes over-contact systems. There's the proof. I took this picture through the telescope so you can see. You're wondering why contact binaries are important. See, he's looking at them. That's what they actually look like. How cool is that? I bet most of you never even knew this existed. And probably didn't care, but it's very cool. So Ed and I have done a lot of work together. We used the International Ultraviolet Explorer satellite quite a bit to look at the ultraviolet spectra of stars. We've also used the Hubble telescope together to look at binaries in other galaxies. So he and I have done a lot of work together. I also have written a program called Binary Maker, which actually recreates these stars in the computer and models them. So the actual stars themselves are mathematically recreated. And it generates the exact same light that the stars actually do. So here's the screens of it. And this blue curve going through the red dots, if you can see it, the blue is the theoretical curve that the program is generating from this model. So that's what the stars would actually look like, this pair of stars to the right. So actually, you can see it looks like they're coming together. And given a few million years, they will. But at the moment, as they rotate around each other, they're eclipsing each other, and the light is getting bright, dark, as they go around each other. In this program, what there? Yeah, the red dots, if you can see them, are actual data that we actually observed at Eastern. And then this blue curve, this is actually the first time I've shown anybody this data. So it's the public debut. Anyway, that's one of the things I'm known for. Now, go back a little bit. In 1996, the observatory was built. I'll never forget this, it's so funny. So everybody's all excited about this. So in September of that year, I went to see Harold Howard. I said, Harold, we've got this great observatory, now we have to upgrade the planetarium. I'll never forget the look on his face. He says, Dave, you've got to learn to be satisfied. And I looked at him and I said, Harold, you've known me for 20 years. You know I'm never satisfied. It's not going to work. we got to upgrade. So I had to convince him. He said, look, if you raise the money, you can build. Yeah, thanks very much. And so it only took us 10 more years to raise the money to upgrade to a digital planetarium, which we built in November of 2006. And so then that was the difference. The difference between a digital planetarium and an optomechanical one, the old one with the holes and stuff, which what you guys grew up with as kids going to planetariums, is the difference between a typewriter and a word processor. They were cool, but they don't touch a word processor. I can put anything on the dome. And so you can create things, you can create scenarios that don't exist to help get across teaching ideas. So I wrote 4 volumes of curriculum for the company, which they then gave to all the planetariums that they make. And a company called Cosmo has bought me out and now has taken my curriculum and given it to 800 other planetariums all over the world. Cool. Yeah, it's really exciting. So that's the digital projector that used to be in our planetarium. We've since upgraded even over that. And this is just the covers of the curriculum that I created. So that's kind of fun. There's a picture of inside the planetarium. And that's and those who know Eastern, this is the soccer field here. So anything you can create with a computer, I can put up on the dome. And I can take you anywhere in the world. I can take you anywhere in space. I just won't bring you back. And I like this picture. I got this off the internet. This is such a cool picture. This is a picture of my curriculum being demonstrated at an open house where they upgraded to a side-dome using my curriculum, which quite frankly, you probably didn't know that I wrote, but that was my planetarium when I was in high school. How cool is that? Very cool. I just thought that was really, that was such a fun thing to see. I'm sure they didn't know. And at that institute, look, here it is. I've been teaching at that institute for the past 19 years. As one of their people teaching them how to use planetariums. So I went from being a little high school guy to teaching. Lots of fun. That's the most insane group of people you will ever get to meet, especially Rupert right there. He has purple hair. I've written a book in case you're interested. You can buy it on Amazon called Starstruck. Some people here have actually read it. You can tell them and they don't like it. I wrote a chapter, an invited chapter about binary stars in this book you can also get on Amazon called The Story of the Cosmos. A whole bunch of really interesting articles written by Christian astronomers for the most part. So if you're interested in getting a little bit more heavy things. And then the International Astronomical Union is the official governing body of astronomers worldwide, and they voted to name an asteroid after me. 5826 Bradstreet. This is not like the star registry where you pay for a star. There's actually an asteroid named after me in honor of the work that I've done. Yeah, how exciting. That and $5 will get you a coffee. Anyway, so you can actually look that up online. I'm not making this up, but that's an actual asteroid. It's probably the one that's going to hit the Earth. That'd just be my luck. Okay, so that's again, you can see it's a very weird road for a person to become an astronomer. I went to a school that didn't even have astronomy. They had a planetarium, but no astronomy major. People thought I was crazy for going to Eastern. That's like the stupidest place to go. They don't have astronomy. It worked out okay. Had I not gone there, I would never have met my wife. My kids would never have been born, right? So that was the most not, yeah, I've been miserable. Yes, exactly right. So I had this question asked to me 2 weeks ago. And so I figured it's probably a good thing to just mention. How do you reconcile science with your faith? So this is a very innocent question. And I had a really profound answer for him. Okay, what did I say? How do I not? He liked that answer because he was a Christian. So it's really, truth is truth, yes? And if you arrive at it through the process of science, or if you arrive at it through divine revelation, if it's true, right? And they're never going to conflict. And if they conflict, either one of them is wrong, or you're misinterpreting scripture, or science is wrong and you're misinterpreting, yes? But you never have to fear science. Scientists, yes. Because people are a problem. But, if science is actually revealing the truth, it's not an issue. And if it goes against your interpretation of scripture, maybe you need to adjust your interpretation. Because the Bible was written for us, not to us. I'm quoting somebody. In other words, it was written to Jewish nomadic peoples, yes? So it has to be interpreted, yes? We can talk about that later. I have a lot more to get through. So, in a perfect world, science makes a hypothesis, and then you do observations to see if that hypothesis is true or not. And if you find that your observations go against your hypothesis, what do? You either toss the hypothesis or modify it, right? At least that's what you're supposed to do. And the realm of science is the observable universe. Universe, by the way, do you know where that word comes from? Uni means uni, and verse means verse. Universe. You guys are falling asleep on me already. Uni means what? And verse means turning. So the word universe means one turning, and the ancients called the universe that because the whole sky does what? The whole sky looks like it turns in one uniform fashion, like a big sphere. That's where we get the word universe. Got it? Okay, don't forget that. That's in the test afterwards. If you're talking about stuff that you can't measure, it's beyond the realm of science. Please remember this, okay? So when scientists say there's no God, that is an unscientific statement. Okay? They're perfectly okay. You can have that opinion, yes? I just think it's funny that even Satan doesn't believe that. Only humans think there's no God. Satan and his minions, they know there's a God. Yes. Right? Yeah, okay. Religion doesn't depend just on observation, but on divine revelation, telling us things that only God can tell us, things that we can't necessarily discern by, looking at the universe entirely. Although we can learn a lot about God by studying his universe, yes? But not everything. Because nobody's going to come up with this crazy idea that God could become a man. That's like the craziest thing I ever heard. That's how I know it's true. Who's going to come up with that? You'll see when you get there. What I'd like to do is I'd like to show you a bit of divine revelation that took scientists, let me think about this for a minute, about 4,000 to 5,000 years to come up with. Are you interested? Yeah. It has to do with the story of Abram. All right, so I need to tell you a little bit of astronomy in order to show you how long it took scientists to catch up with this idea. So this is right out of the Bible. So in Genesis, after these things, the word of the Lord came to Abram. That's what he was called, Abram, in the beginning. In a vision saying, "Do not fear, Abram, I am a shield to you. Your reward shall be very great." Abram said, "O Lord God, what will you give me, since I am childless, and the heir of my house is Eleazar of Damascus?" And Abram said, "Since you have given me no offspring to me, one born in my house is my heir." And then behold, the word of the Lord came to him, saying, "This man will not be your heir, but one who will come forth from your own body, he shall be your heir." And he took him outside and said, "Now look toward the heavens and count the stars, if you're able to count them." And he said to him, "So shall your descendants be." Cool. So cool. And so it seems like he's saying to Abram, not only are you going to have somebody born from your body, but your descendants are going to be as numerous as the stars in the sky. Sounds good, right? Not that big of a deal. At least not to the ancient people. There are about 6,000 stars in the sky that you can see. 3,000 at a time. You can only see half the sky. You with me on this? 6,000 stars. Most of you are going to have at least 6,000 descendants, given enough time. Yeah? It's a geometrical, proportional Scooby thing, yes? That's what happens. It's not that big of a deal. Because that's what the ancient people thought. There's like 6,000 stars. So it's not that great a promise. Okay? Yeah, difficult to count, but not impossible. Right? So here's a picture of the whole sky. This thing cutting across here, which we're going to talk about in detail, that's the Milky Way. Whatever that is. Lots of stars. Okay. Now later, after Abraham and Sarah had Isaac, yes? You remember that God said to Abraham, because he changed his name to protect the innocent. He said, look, take your only son, bring him up on top of Mount Moriah, and sacrifice him to me. Abraham, by this time, had learned when God says do stuff, you just do it. Even though this is his only son, which he has promised he's going to have all these descendants, he's going to get rid of his only son. And Abraham and Sarah were super old by this time. But off he did. So he was going to do it. So what? Abraham was about to sacrifice Isaac on Mount Moriah, which is where the Temple Mount eventually was in Jerusalem. And God sent an angel to stop him, remember? Because he was testing him. And provided a ram in a nearby bush to be a sacrificial substitute, right? This is the archetype of the Christ, yes? And then he had this to say in Genesis. Now, this is critically important. This is what all your ministers are supposed to say relative to this story. Well, there's a picture of the instant I took this when this was happening. You see Abraham about to kill Isaac, and the angel stopped him, and you can see the goat here. The goat is not happy, you can tell. So then the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven and said, by myself I have sworn, declares the Lord, because you have done this thing, and have not withheld your son, your only son. Indeed, I will greatly bless you, and I will greatly multiply your seed as the stars of the heavens. Look what he adds. Look what he adds. He didn't say this the first time. Look what he adds. And as the sand which is on the seashore, and your seed shall possess the gate of their enemies. But wait a minute. Wait a minute. Is he on drugs? What? Wait a minute. How are you going to reconcile those two values? You get 6,000 stars. How many grains of sand are there on the earth? It's in the quintillions. It makes our national debt look like nothing. It's a huge, huge number. This is the craziest thing ever. How can you possibly say that? It's like saying, I'm going to give you thousands of dollars, or I'm going to give you quintillions of dollars. Those two numbers don't jive at all. Right? At all. It's not like saying thousands or millions, or thousands and billions, or thousands and trillions, or thousands and quadrillions. It's thousands and quintillions. How do we reconcile that? Well, let's find out. We're going to do it by looking at the Milky Way. I'm going to show you how we figured this out. And I'll go through it fairly quickly, or try to. So my clicker behaves sporadically. Here we go. What is this Milky Way? What did people think the Milky Way was? What is it made? This thing that cuts across the sky in this circle here. You know, what in the world is that band that looks like hazy, dark things, which are very hard to see from here, but if you've ever been, yes, in a dark sky, it's the most prominent object in the sky. What is it? People didn't know. It's really strange. The Greeks called it the Kyklios Galaxios, which is where we get the word galaxy from. Kyklios Galaxios means literally circle, milky. So Galaxios actually means milky. So it's the Milky Circle. What do the Romans call it? They call it the Via Lactea, right? The Milky Way. Yeah. A lot of cultures, it's interesting, a lot of cultures thought that the Milky Way was actually the road which led to heaven, that souls, it was like a guiding road to get souls up to heaven. A lot of cultures thought that, including Native Americans. Some people thought that the Milky Way was actually what happened when Hercules was ripped from Hera, he was nursing, He was ripped from Hera, and the milk spilled, and that became the Milky Way. That's Zeus. Because that's not Hera's baby. That's Zeus's baby. You have to read your mythology. It took me a long time to make this picture because, that was a traumatic moment in their history. If you know Aristotle and how smart he was, he thought the Milky Way was just gas coming up from the Earth. Sounds like gas describing UFOs. That actually makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. But that's what he thought. And some people thought that maybe the Milky Way was actually stars. But very few people believe that, because that's pretty hard to actually believe. It's just strange that something that covers the sky like that, it really wasn't understood until 1930, which we're getting to. You know that guy, that's Galileo. And he was the first one to point a telescope to the Milky Way and show that it's actually made up out of stars. So here's an actual photograph of a tiny part of the Milky Way, and every dot you see there is an individual star. Do a close-up of that. This is the North American Nebula here, but every one of those points of light is a star. That's a lot of stars. Okay. But people still didn't understand what the universe was. Now they knew the Milky Way was made of stars, but that's all they knew. So they divided up the universe into 6 types of gas clouds they called nebulae. Okay, and so let me show you what those are. Are we doing all right? You with me on this? Okay. So they weren't sure what these exactly were, but they classified them 6 different types. The first is called the planetary nebula. It's called that because it looks like a disk in the telescope, and of course it has nothing to do with planets, which is why they call it that. Astronomers have no idea what they're talking about when it comes to classification, because they're goofy. So there it is. This is actually a star that has blown up, and it leaves its core behind right there. I'll show you a close-up of it. So this is actually a star with a red giant, and it blew up its gas, went into space, left that core behind, and this eventually will help make new stars. How cool is that? Then there were dark nebulae. These are actually, this makes sense. This is the nebula that's dark. I don't know how astronomers got that one right. This is called the Horsehead Nebula because it looks like a horsehead. Yeah, good for you. This is an actual close-up picture of it, showing you that what's actually happening here are stars are being born within that dark cloud. God is still making stars. I know you don't believe that, but he's still making people, right? Yeah. Okay, well, there you go. He's still creating stuff. He has lots of fun. Emission nebulae, these are clouds that glow because they're close to a star that makes the gas fluoresce. Each color is a different element because every element glows a different color. How cool is that? You think astronomy is hard. My granddaughter can do this. She's 5. If you see pink, that's hydrogen. Look how easy that is, right? Every element glows a different color. Look at that. What's that element? See? You already know more astronomy than 99.9% of the human population. That's not saying very much. Then there are reflection nebulae. These are not glowing, but they're scattering light from nearby stars. Just like our atmosphere is what color? It's blue, isn't it? For the same reason that short wavelengths of light, blue light, is scattered by gas. Cool. And look, there's a reflection nebula next to an emission nebula interspersed with a dark nebula. Very nice. Then there were these things called elliptical nebulae. I'll give you one guess why they were called elliptical nebulae. Because they're elliptical looking. Very good. And they look like a cigar. I didn't know what these were. It's like a fried egg on edge. They also had nebulae that were called spiral nebulae. And why did they call them spiral nebulae? Because it looks like they have spiral arms. Now remember, they're calling them nebulae, which means they think they're made of what? They're just gas clouds. And that's what they look like. If you look at them through a telescope, that's exactly what they look like. They just look like fuzzy gas clouds. These are actual pictures, yes. So how do we explain this? Why does the Milky Way look like a big circle in the sky? That's the first thing we want to try to explain. Okay. As we get to, why are there so many stars all located just in that band? How do we explain that? Right? What's this? Why? Why are there so many billions of stars all located here? I don't know. Yes, I do. So Thomas Wright was an English surveyor. He had been a sailor in his young life and then became a philosopher, and you probably never heard of him. He was a Christian. And he got this idea that the universe was spherically shaped. That was not a new idea. But he thought that the universe was actually in the shape of a spherical shell, and we live in the shell. Okay? And it's very, very big. And so it looks like it's flat because we're in that shell. Just like, yes, the Earth is like round, but it's kind of big compared to us, so it looks like it's flat. Yes? It's not flat. Some people still think that, but they're goofy. So what Wright was saying is, look, I think the universe is a big spherical shell of stars. We're located, in that shell, but the shell is so big that the sun is here. When you look in this direction, or you look in this direction, you're looking at the most number of stars. So that's the Milky Way. And when you look perpendicular to it, you see fewer stars. That makes sense, right? It actually makes a lot of sense. And so that was his idea, is that the sun is sort of here. You look this way to the Milky Way, this way to the Milky Way. This way you don't see nearly as many stars. Okay, it makes perfect sense. So Immanuel Kant, who you may have heard of, a very famous philosopher, before he became famous, read about Wright's work, actually in the Cliff Notes version, and thought to himself, this is a great idea. Why do you need a shell? Why can't the universe just be the shape, say, of a lens or a disk? And why does it have to be? There's no evidence that it's a shell. And so he came up with the flattened disk idea, thinking that the whole universe is here, everything is contained in it, and the sun is somewhere in here somewhere. So then William Herschel, now you may not have heard of William Herschel, but he's the guy who discovered the planet Uranus, and it's pronounced Uranus, not the other way. Bad enough Uranus. First person to ever discover a planet. Actually, when he discovered it, he wanted to name it after King George III, who was king of the Revolutionary American Revolution, the crazy King George. Wouldn't that have been cool to have a planet named George? That would have been awesome. Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, George. Hooray! That would have been awesome. Actually, it would be better than Uranus, but that's another story. So William Herschel, along with his sister Caroline, did a lot of observations where he would study and count the number of stars in certain sections of the sky. This is better known as tedious. And he did that, he mapped them out, and this is what his universe looked like. So there's the universe. Look familiar? And where's the sun? So when you look in this direction or this direction, you're looking towards the Milky Way. And when you look in this direction, you're looking through a smaller cross section, and that's why you don't see as many stars. Make sense? So he's basically validating Immanuel Kant's idea that the Milky Way is this flattened disk, and the Milky Way is the entire universe, and everything is contained within it. And that was the overriding belief at this time. So you've got two different kinds of thought on this by the 19th century, by the 1800s. Some people thought that the universe and all these nebulae, elliptical and spiral, were actually individual galaxies, and that the Milky Way was one galaxy. That's what some people thought. That was a mind-blowing belief, that you had literally billions of galaxies out there, each of which containing hundreds of billions of stars, where our Milky Way would just be one. That's like, you gotta be kidding. It's one of the reasons people didn't accept it. The second hypothesis, this was actually the more widely believed one, was Kant's idea about the nebula hypothesis, where all the nebulae are contained within the Milky Way. The Milky Way is the entire universe. Everything's contained within it. Okay, the sun is at the center, which made people happy. So you've got a universe, the entire universe, all these elliptical and spiral nebulae are just gas clouds contained within that universe. And so that was the big debate all the way up into the 1900s. And most people believed in the nebular hypothesis. So when's this going to change? It's going to change when we start making big telescopes. And that happened in the 20th century. You may have heard of this guy, Edwin Hubble. Edwin Hubble, after World War I, went to work at Mount Wilson in California. And the brand new 100-inch diameter, it's the Hooker telescope, because a guy named Hooker gave the money for it. It's not what you're thinking. That's the guy's name. Just to show you how big this is, like there's a normal-sized person. Look at him, there he is. Okay. He used this huge telescope to look at the nebula that they called the Andromeda Nebula. And what he did with this huge telescope was he could actually resolve the gas into individual stars, proving that that nebula wasn't just gas, it's actually stars, individual stars. Okay. He then found what's called a Cepheid variable, a pulsating star, which allows us to actually get the distance to this crazy thing. So you recognize this as the moon, yes? This is the size of the Andromeda galaxy in the sky if you could actually see it as a bright object. You can see that it's like 6 times bigger than the moon. So it actually covers a big part of the sky. The problem is it's faint, so you really can't see it with your eyes. But that's how big it is in the sky compared to the size of the moon. Here's a close-up picture of it. And again, you're looking at about 300 billion stars here. Here's a picture that Hubble actually took, and he found a Cepheid star which pulsates, and we can get the distance to it. And so what he found by studying that star was his number came out to that nebula was 1 million light years away, 1 million light years away, 1 million light years away. A light year is 6 trillion miles. So it takes 1 million years. That's what he came up with. He was wrong because he used the wrong kind of Cepheids. He didn't know. The actual distance is 2.2 million light years. So when you see that object in the sky, that light has been traveling for 2.2 million years before it hits and caresses your retina. Those photons, they ended up in your eye. It's like, I hope they're not dissatisfied after traveling for 2.2 million years. That's a huge distance. And so that showed that object was not in the Milky Way. It's far beyond the Milky Way. So what does all this mean? It means that the island universe theory is correct. And there are countless, almost, other galaxies like our Milky Way. Our Milky Way has about 300 billion stars in it. Our sun is one of them. Okay? And it's sort of big. The elliptical and spiral nebulae are actually galaxies of their own. This is what our galaxy would look like from a top view. We actually have a bar going through the center. Not that kind of a bar. Okay? The religious people don't know what that means. Our sun is located, we're in the suburbs. Don't go in here, there's a big supermassive black hole, don't go in there. That's where we live. It's a very large object, 100,000 light years across. Okay, that's very, very big. We're about 8,000 parsecs away. So we live out here in the suburbs, right here, which is a good place to be. And so we're in this, we're in the third planet of this ordinary, relatively ordinary star. It's amazing that God can even find us. That's something to think about. All right, that still hasn't answered the question, okay? How many stars actually are there in the universe? We're going to figure it out. We're going to do an estimate. We'll do it right here. Don't fall asleep. It's going to be fun. Here's a picture called the Hubble Ultra Deep Field. This was taken by, I forget, it's like 400 orbits of the Hubble, taking 2 pictures per orbit. So 800 pictures all pushed into one. There's this telescope John Hargis has been working at for how long, John, did you work at Hubble? 15? 10 years. So if I'm saying anything wrong, he'll say something, but he won't. So almost everything in this picture is a galaxy. Okay? There's very few individual stars. There's one right there, but there aren't that many. Almost everything on this picture, and if you were careful to count, you'd find there's about 10,000 galaxies in that picture. Okay, that's impressive by itself, but how big a piece of sky does this cover? Let's see if we can find out, okay? So 800 exposures, 400 orbits, about 10,000 galaxies in that picture. So how much of the sky does that picture actually cover? Okay, so let's see. How much of the sky does this picture cover? You guys know what this is, yes? The moon, right? Think of the moon in the sky. It's not very big. If you've ever tried to take a picture of it with your camera, you realize how small it actually is, yes? Let me show you how big this picture is compared to the size of the moon in the sky. You ready? You see that little red square? That's how much of the sky the telescope was taking a picture of. 10,000 galaxies in that tiny little area. Okay, so how does that translate then to how many galaxies are there then over the whole sky? And this was an empty part of the sky. It would take 12.7 million of those images to cover the whole sky. 12.7 million of them. That would take a total of about 1 million years to do, so that's not going to happen. Okay. But what we can do, if it takes 12.7 million of them to cover the whole sky, and there's 10,000 galaxies in each picture, we take 12.7 million of them with 10,000 galaxies in each one, multiply that together, we get 127 billion galaxies. That's a lot. That's a lot, and that's a conservative estimate. Okay. So how many stars are there? If we go to the conservative, that each one of those galaxies has about 100 billion stars in it, and that's very conservative. Multiply 100 billion times 127 billion, and you get 12,700 quintillion stars in the universe, conservatively. So it's going to be more than that. Yes? That's like a lot of zeros. That's a lot of zeros. So why am I showing you this? I know that's what you're asking. I don't even know. Anytime you're ready. Ready. If I threaten it, there, see? Look how many particles of sand exist on the Earth. That's an estimate, a mathematical estimate. What do you notice? There's actually more stars than there are grains of sand on the Earth, but you notice that those numbers are almost, they're both in the quintillions, aren't they? Interesting. I just think it's interesting that there's almost 10 quintillion water molecules in one teardrop. That's going the other way. Shows you how small atoms are. I just thought you'd like to hear about that, you know. Right? In fact, I often hear astronomers say in their talks that there's as many stars in the universe as there are grains of sand on the Earth. Where have we heard that? I heard that somewhere else. Where did I hear that? Do you understand that the Bible made that comparison over 4,000 years ago? How long did it take us to actually realize that those two numbers are actually very close to being the same number? 1930. 4,000 years plus later. And yet that's what God said to Abraham. Yes? Yet tell me that no human is going to make that comparison. It's just never going to happen. Are you with me on this? Do you understand that this Bible is not just a book made up by people? This book is inspired. Yes? And we finally caught up with it in 1930. Look at what we had to go through to realize that what God said to Abraham was very comparable in number. I just think that's really cool. So let me just end with a couple of verses and then we'll open it up for questions. From Psalm 147, gee, how appropriate. God counts the number of stars. He gives names to all of them. Good luck with that. Great is our Lord, and abundant in strength. His understanding is infinite. The Lord supports the afflicted. He brings down the wicked to the ground. Sing to the Lord with thanksgiving. Sing praises to our God on the lyre. Who covers the heavens with clouds, who provides rain for the earth, who makes grass to grow in the mountains. He gives to the beast its food, and to the young ravens which cry. Are you catching what this psalm is saying? Everything that happens on the earth is God providing, yes? It's not God made the universe, it runs on its own. He's in the Bahamas reading a newspaper. That's called deism. God is active. That's what this is saying. The universe runs because God is making it run at all times, in all places. In Colossians, Paul writes, he is the image, this is talking about Jesus, is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all, over all creation. For by him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities, all things were created by him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. That God is the creator and the sustainer. That's critically important. He didn't just make the universe. He made it, and it runs by his command. Every atom in every star throughout the universe, and possibly an infinite number of universes, God commands all those atoms to do what they're doing. I know you're thinking, what? Your God is too small if you don't think he can handle that. Yes? If he can find you a parking place out here, he can do anything. And to put it in terms that people understand. Again, just to reemphasize, the writer of the Hebrews says, God, after he spoke long ago to the fathers and the prophets, in many portions and in many ways, in these last days, he has spoken to us in his Son, whom he appointed heir of all things, and through whom he also made the world. And he is the radiance of his glory and the exact representation of his nature, and upholds all things by the word of his power. There you see it again, the sustaining aspect of God. Very important. You guys are old enough to remember in the 60s. Do you remember the Time magazine cover? Is God dead? Do you remember that cover? The stupidest question ever. In other words, if there's a God and he's gone, guess what happens to the universe? It just ceases to exist. It will not stay up on its own. It never has, it never will. God is upholding the universe. And so science, I heard a secular, very famous physicist say this, that God cannot explain, science cannot explain why the universe runs on what we call differential equations. Why does the universe obey all these goofy laws? You guys know the answer. It's doing it because it's a manifestation of God commanding the universe. Yes? Scientists are taught that the universe runs by laws. These laws are God's manifestation in the universe. Do you understand? You're seeing the trustworthiness, this is how God is. Things, right? If I drop something, it's going to fall. The trustworthiness of his laws. Right? The creator and the sustainer. We and Satan's followers are the only part of the universe that do not obey his laws. And that's not a good distinction. So we need to obey his laws. And so I end where I started. This is what happens after 50 years of marriage. There's Andrew, my 3-year-old that I showed you, with his family. And John, the 1-month-old, with his family, our 5 grandkids. Cool, right? That's the best part. Yeah, grandkids are the only good thing about getting old. Okay, so that's my talk. I hope that was okay. So if you're okay, if you want to ask questions, you can ask questions. I'm not answering any, but you can ask them. Do you have any questions for me?
Can I give a 60-second version of what you just did? Yes.
Go ahead. 60 seconds.
So, because of the Hubble telescope, if you hold your pinky finger out, the amount of sky that's covered by your pinky fingernail, they discover there's 10,000 galaxies in that amount of sky. And each galaxy has between 200 to 400 billion stars. And when Abraham said grains of sand and number of stars are comparative, Abraham didn't know that, but God did. And it really is a good comparative number, which we didn't know until we had the Hubble telescope. And he calls them all by name. Not one is missing. What an awesome God.
Thank you, Jim. Yes, ma'am.
Why are a growing number of conservative Christians anti-science?
It's a very good question. Why are so many, and people in general too? I think that a lot of people, and people in the room who are either scientists or have come from a science background, this is pretty much the way you were trained. You've got religion over here, and you get science over here. And, you know, if we just learn enough stuff, we will find that you don't need God. God is just a God of the gaps kind of idea, and eventually we'll be able to explain everything. And again, this is the complete misunderstanding of what science does. Look, if you want to talk to a scientist and find out how ignorant they really are, just start asking them some general questions. So I'll give you one, for example. You guys know what electric charge is? If you don't, stick your finger in the socket. But, you know, you walk across the rug and you pat a cat and you get a little shock and the cat never comes to you again. Okay, ask the scientist this. What is electric charge? What is it about the electron that it has this property that we call charge? Why does it have charge? And the answer is, we don't know. There's a lot of stuff, basic things. We can describe nature very well, but we don't understand some of it at its most basic. So don't let anybody pretend that we have this all together, because we do not. So why they're just following the secular trend that if we learn enough, you know, these Christians are just ignorant. Unfortunately, there are Christians who kind of fall into that, thinking that the universe is young, that the earth is flat. It's a complete misinterpretation of Scripture, which people tend to do because they don't study the Scripture well enough. There's things in the Bible that you have to study carefully to understand that, you know, you can't take the Bible literally. Do you want an example? No? Good, okay. I'll give you an example. Those of you who grew up on the King James Version, the King James Version has unicorns in it. Don't believe? What do you mean, what? Go look at the King James Version. It has unicorns in it. It does. You won't find it in the new versions because they just put beast in there, but they had unicorns in there originally. Also, you'll see if you go to like Jeremiah, but this isn't the only example. It says in Jeremiah that God judges man by his mind, his heart and his reins. His heart and his reins. That's the English translation in the King James of the original Hebrew. But what does that mean? So God is judging you by your heart. And what are your reins? I'll give you a clue. Do you have a doctor that's a renal doctor? What's he studying? Yeah, the reins is the Latin word for kidney. So God is judging you by your heart and your kidneys. That is what the Hebrew says. That's what it says. So if you've got a bad heart and bad kidneys, you're out. That's it. You're not going to heaven. That's what it says. If you check the translations now, guess what it says? It doesn't say that. So God judges man by his heart and his mind. That's not what it says. It says kidneys. Because the ancient people understood that the kidneys, that's where the intellect resided. So God's got to use the language of the people, otherwise we won't understand anything. So God is using our language, as dumb as it might be, to get across the idea that he's judging us by our heart and our mind. So they thought the mind resided in the kidneys. You know this is true. Number one, the Bible never mentions the brain once, because even then they didn't use it. And the Egyptians, when they mummified, what did they preserve? The internal organs, but guess what they didn't preserve? What did they do with the brain? They yanked it out through the nostrils and chucked it because it's a useless organ. So there's one example of, okay, now we understand that the kidney, that's not where the mind resides. Now the funniest part is we still use heart to represent the emotions. Do you realize how stupid that is? It's like saying, the heart is a muscle. It's like saying, I love you with all my biceps. See, you act like that's a stupid thing, but that's what you're saying. It's a muscle. Okay, it's an important muscle, but it's not where, you understand, you have to read the scriptures in context with the time, who was God speaking to. The truth is there. Yes? God does judge you by what's going on in your inner being. Okay? But it's not the literal translation. Are you with me on this? Yeah, so you can attribute that, you can use that same idea by looking at Genesis, looking at the 6-day creation and understand that what is God going to say? I created the universe out of nothingness. He said that. He's going to talk about pair production and annihilation? You're talking to nomads asleep with sheep. I mean, what are you going to say? You have to get across the idea of, I made the universe, it's a great place, do what I tell you to do, shape your life on a 6-day week and 1 day to work, yes? But, it's not an actual depiction of how he made the universe. How do we know that? Come on. On the 4th day, he made the sun, moon, and stars. So how do you have 3 mornings and evenings without the sun? I don't know, I never thought about that. So it's a story to help us understand God is the creator, he's good, behave yourself, and move on. Are you with me on this? Mm-hmm. So when did you get taught this in church? When did you get taught this in science class? Problem is most scientists have not had a philosophy of science class. That's part of the problem. So they don't really understand the limits of science, and they think religion is nonsense. A lot of people feel that way. So that's the problem. We're not teaching enough of these things, like I'm teaching you tonight, in church. And we should be encouraging our young people to go into science rather than leaving the scientific community in the hands of secular people. There's many ways to serve God, and being a minister or a doctor or whatever is not the only way to do it. We need a lot more scientists. We need a lot more lawyers who are Christians. And we need a lot more politicians who are Christians. So we've abandoned certain areas of our culture to non-Christians, and that's our fault. So that's a long answer to a very good question.
So you convinced us that we live in a backwater planet, in a backwater galaxy.
You can be proud of our galaxy, though. It's a pretty good, big-sized galaxy.
How do we reconcile God picking this little speck in the entire universe that's created?
So the only thing we have to go by is that the Creator actually visited our planet. That's really the only thing about our planet that makes it special. Think about that, right? The Creator of the universe became one of us and came to our planet. That's probably what the Earth's going to be known for all eternity. So why? It's not the planet. It's you. Of all things in creation, the Genesis story tells you, only humans were made in what? Now think about that. What does that mean? See, everybody thinks that God has eyes and hands, and they keep making God in their own image. That's not what it says. What is it about you that was made in God's image? What does the Bible tell you about God? He's not flesh. He's what? Spirit. It's your soul. Your soul is priceless. It's the only thing in all of creation made in God's image, and it is eternal, like Him. Are you going to spend it with Him or away from Him? That's the two choices. And so that's why the earth is special. It's because His children live there, who were made in His image. Yes? And it's not that God looks like us. He does now because He became Jesus, but that's another story. Yes, it's God is spirit, and what we really are is spirit. And you'll all find that out when you die. Although it's going to be fun because you get to hug Jesus.
Talk us a little bit about the Big Bang.
So the Big Bang Theory says that the universe is really interesting if you look at it carefully. The Big Bang Theory says that the universe was created out of literally nothingness. That before the Big Bang, there was nothingness. Now, most of you think of nothingness as empty space. That's not nothingness, that's space. Space is actually a created thing. And the Big Bang Theory says that before the creation of the universe, there wasn't even space. No energy, no time, no space, nothingness, what the Bible calls the void, the emptiness. And this is also what the Big Bang says. And so all of a sudden, there was this minuscule atomic-sized thing that comprised all of time and space and energy. And it's the universe, that's the whole universe. And it's been expanding ever since. Don't ask me what it's expanding into, because there's nothing for it to expand into. It's like asking what's north of the North Pole. It's a meaningless question. So the Big Bang is not something to run from. Scientists run from it. Why?
Because they can't define.
Because it shows that the universe had a beginning. They don't want to hear that. What caused it? It had a beginning. I have this big fat book that says that's what happened. Right? So the Big Bang Theory was really, I mean, Father Lemaitre was the guy who actually came up with this using Einstein's theories. And he was a priest. So the Big Bang Theory does not go against God. It actually is a big piece of evidence that the universe was different in the past, has been expanding ever since God made it. And so it had a beginning. And that's what the Bible says. I know you guys aren't surprised by that, but if you were around 150 years ago, most scientists would tell you that the universe had no beginning and no end, it just is. They attributed the attributes of God to the universe. It's always been here, it's always going to be here, goes on forever. That's all there is. There's no God. That was the commonplace belief among secular scientists. So having a creation event that science says, look, there's a creation event, that doesn't fit into secular scientists' view. So don't let people tell you that the Big Bang is anti-God. It's actually not, unless you think it just happened on its own, which we don't believe, because we don't think anything happens on its own, right? Not just the creation of the universe, but the fact that you're all in this room tonight, right? It's not a coincidence. You all wanted soup. Any other questions? Yes.
I got to hear the Vatican's astronomers.
Guy Consolmo.
Right. And what they were saying was a little different. I think maybe what you were just talking about, that their understanding of the complexity of the math that tells us that the universe is expanding is actually the proof in God, almost you're talking about the Bible being, the proof, and the universe is the evidence. Kind of a reverse on that the math itself and the structured orderness of it means there had to be a divine.
Yeah, so be careful. Be careful. If they say proof, they're going too far.
Okay.
You can't prove.
I said proof.
Yeah, but there's a big difference, because remember the Bible, it says that you can't please God without faith. There's nobody that can prove that God exists. And while that's still true, it still takes faith to believe in God. As long as that's true, people can be saved. When Jesus comes through the clouds, and there's no denying it, and everybody bows their knees. The faith, you don't need faith anymore because faith becomes sight. Yes?
Yeah.
So you can't prove that God exists, but the evidence is strong. Right?
And would you agree with that, the math and the?
Yeah, the math points to that. Absolutely. Yeah, Einstein thought Father Lemaitre was nuts until he looked at the math. And then finally had to admit that Father Lemaitre was absolutely 100% correct. Yeah. So it's not proof, but it's strong evidence. But you know, if you're an atheist and you don't want to believe in God, it doesn't matter what happens, right? You won't be able to convince anyone. It's a faith thing, ultimately. You have to make that decision. But the evidence is huge.
Have we, as humans, to your knowledge, created any systems that just go on forever without intervention?
Not that I'm aware of.
So then it's intuitive and compelling to me that in order for the universe to continue to operate, it would have to have an active presence of God to keep it functioning.
That's certainly what the Bible says. You know, a secular science would just say that it got started and eventually it's going to run down and collapse in one form or another, given enough time. So again, that's not even proof. But as you would, and I would both agree, the evidence is, to me, overwhelming, but it's not proof. But it's a very good point. Any others? We're going to be here forever.
Hey, do you have a favorite app that you like to look at the stars, astronomy, and do stuff?
I think Google Sky. There's a program you can learn, I think Apple has a similar, where you put it in your phone, it's typically free. If you hold it up to the sky, it'll actually show you exactly what you're looking at. So if you're not sure, you know, what you're looking at, it'll actually show you. So Google Sky is one of them. There's a couple others. Are we good? I know you've been so patient, you don't want to go home. Well, thank you again for coming out. I very much appreciate it.
We have a little bag for you to remember Wayne Press. Although you have many memories of Wayne Press as well. There's a few items that we give to visitors, but there's one special item in here.
My wife will love this.
Yeah, maybe not. It's a pair of socks with the known universe, known planets. There's one here that's unlabeled, which I guess is Pluto.
That's probably Pluto.
But there's no George, so we're not up to we hope you enjoy that.
Thank
Really,
you.
Thank you for coming to this.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you again, everybody. Have a good evening. Thank you. Thank you.